State Fair Classic, Grambling versus Prairie View A&M. The stakes are through the roof when it comes to PV, and that's why it's our game of the week. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to make every moment more and put down a $5 bet to get $200 back in bonus bets. This is all about the State Fair Classic. It's all about Grambling versus Prairie View A&M, and I'm extremely excited for this game. I'm actually a little bit jealous that I'm not able to go to it. It's so close to where I am that typically I would, but we out of town with it this weekend, so not necessarily an option. But boy, do I wish I could be there, and I suggest that you find a way to get there. Now, we'll do our typical for my new everydayers. 3 matchups, 2 storylines, 1 key to victory. That's the route that we always go on Fridays as we break down our game of the week. So let's kick it off with our matchups. And the first matchup that I'm looking at is Grambling rush offense versus PV's rush defense. And I understand that I did this for last week when I'm looking at Grambling versus Jackson State. It wasn't our game of the week, but that was the primary focal point in my conversation around Grambling versus Jackson State. That was what I wanted to look at. Was Grambling going to be able to run the ball against what had been a stout Jackson State rush defense? And that's the difference, is that it was like a strength on a strength. It was like 2 teams going against each other, and I want to see who's going to pass the test. There's only one real test here, and that's for Prairie View A&M, because they have not stopped the run in the 2 SWAC games that they played. Let's particularly look at the Southern game, because I have been killing Southern's rushing attack. I haven't been happy with it. I haven't, and I'm talking about, I watched the game with Savannah State, and I'm like, this just isn't what it's supposed to look like. They looked utterly dormant against Jackson State. PV rejuvenated this Southern rushing attack. Let me read to you some of these numbers, guys. So you have Kendrick Grimes, Kobe Dillon, and CJ Russell. First off, the worst set of numbers in a running back room. I think it's 6'8" and maybe 0. All looks the same. So from that box, that was difficult to tell who was who, but that's neither here nor there. This is about the Southern rushing attack, and those are the 3 main people that you're going to look at. All 3 of them had a rush of over 20 yards against PV. None of them had 20 rushing yards against Jackson State. That 20 plus was the high. They had their best game of the year. Dillon, Rhymes, Russell all had their best game of the year against PV last week. I'm talking about highest yards per carry. I'm talking about highest yards total. I'm talking about longest rush of the year. All of those things. They checked all those boxes. PV's rushing defense has looked bad. Against Texas Southern, it looked bad. Danny Green came out there, and that was a big thing. My biggest takeaway was the ability for Danny Green in his first career game as a college football player, fresh out of high school, for him to come in and run over that Prairie View A&M defense. That's something that I was looking at. And I think is a little bit disappointing, because PV had so much stock placed in their defensive line. I heard it when I was listening to Bubba McDowell's interview. Shout out KT Mosley, because he was the one who did this interview. He was talking about, yeah, we have 2-3 units deep at the defensive line. They were just talking about how much they love that unit in the depth of it. I haven't seen it. For you to love that unit the way that you have, then you need to be somebody who is going to come in and stop the run. That's what you need to be able to do. You have to be able to stop the run. And I understand that if we're not having the conversation because, well, what they did against, first of all, they won the FCS game, but what they did against non HBCU game, like we grade that with kind of like a grain of salt to a certain degree, and whatever, right? But we're talking about TSU and we're talking about Southern. These are two SWAC opponents, and they dog walked them in the rushing capacity. Southern is the one that really stands out because at the end of the day, I've been killing Southern's rushing attack. So for them to come in and have a solid game against you, that's no bueno to me. Now let's look at the next one that I want to highlight. The next one that I want to highlight is Andrew Jones versus Cam Peters. Cam Peters is Prairie View A&M's quarterback. Andrew Jones is one of the linebackers for Grambling State University. The reason I'm highlighting this is because Cam Peters can run the ball. We saw that last week. I saw it at times against Texas Southern. It wasn't overly prevalent, but I saw enough to know he had it there, right? And then against Southern, he grossed a low amount, but he earned, right? Because they do this thing where they, in a stat sheet, you can see how many positive yards they earned, and you can see how many negative yards that they lost, so to speak. And then you get the net, right? But he went forward 77 yards. He just went backwards 40, so it ended up being at 37. But you're looking at the positive 77, and I'm thinking to myself, at the worst, that's telling me he's got it in his toolbox. At the worst, it's telling me I need to game plan for the idea that he could take off. Maybe I don't need to make it a big part of my game plan. Maybe I don't need to focus on it for a couple of practices, but I do need to make sure that our guys are ready in case Cam Peters takes off. And if Peters is to take off, Andrew Jones is somebody that I'm looking to on whether or not they're going to stop him. And I think that it worked last year going forward, or last week going forward. I expect them to at least try it a couple of times. Again, I think his legs can be a real weapon. But you know whose legs are also a weapon? Cam, excuse me, now I was going to say Cam Peters, but it's Cam McCoy from Jackson State. And there was one play in particular, and I think that McCoy was keeping his eyes downfield looking for someone to throw to. I could be wrong, but it really doesn't matter because it was more so about how Jones tracked him. He's still an athlete, and he closed the gap, right? McCoy is still a very athletic player. He could have spotted that and took off. And I think he did attempt to, but his acceleration wasn't enough because Jones tracked so well. He was like a heat-seeking missile where he just exploded to the runner. I think you could see that happen again. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had his eyes downfield, and then he tried to take off, and he tried to catch the edge, and he couldn't catch the edge, and ended up getting slung down. That was a really good play. It was one of the plays that stood out to me, and it showed me Jones's athleticism. If you need a better example of what I'm speaking about from Jones's perspective and not necessarily McCoy, Jones, think about a pass to the flats, and you see a linebacker just shoot out there. That's what it looked like. That was essentially what it was. It was close to that area, except it was behind the line of scrimmage. That was a really athletic play. And if you're talking about a guy who could blitz, you're talking about a guy who could watch the quarterback and track him. I think that both of those things could be very useful for Andrew Jones in the Grambling defense against an athletic quarterback like Cam Peters. Now, my last one that I want to highlight, the last matchup is Grambling's pass rush versus PV's offensive line. And I'm going to do a little bit less talking about Grambling's pass rush because it's not necessarily about what they've done and who's the standout edge rusher for the Tigers. That's not the point at all. So I'm going to leave that alone. This matchup falls squarely on the shoulders of PV's offensive line. Like I said, we do all of these things of, well, you know, they face so-and-so and so-and-so. PV has played Southern and Texas Southern. That little excuse that we try to do for out of conference games doesn't work for them. They played 2 conference games already, and their offensive line gave up a total of 13 sacks, 7 in one game, 6 in the other. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable, and it's going to be very difficult to win games that way. I understand that you felt like you could have won that Southern game. I accept and I understand that, but at the same time, you didn't win, and you got, sacked 7 times. Cam Peters hit the turf 7 times against the Jaguars. I don't care if there was 3 overtimes. That's not supposed to happen. That is a sign of a struggling offensive line. Against Texas Southern, Cam Peters also shared time with Lucas Coley. Coley went down 4 times. Peters went down twice. That is 6 total sacks. That makes up 13 in 2 SWAC games. You never want to give up 13 sacks in the course of 2 games. That's unacceptable. That is not going to work. That is bad football. That is bad protection, and you are severely limiting what Cam Peters can do. And maybe that's why you have to run so much, because you understand that the pressure is getting through quickly. This is going to be something very interesting to me to watch. Can you protect Cam Peters? Can you give him time? I saw some flashes in the PV game or in the PVTSU game. I've seen some of them, but I wouldn't have to see more, obviously. And this is a very important game for them. PV, if they lose this game, their season's over. And I'm gonna break that down a little bit more, because that's our lead and biggest storyline in this game. Honestly, it's the biggest talking point in this game. So let's explore that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. And with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn a very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Go ahead and check out Robinhood Gold today. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Dogs. That's Georgia. They got a big game versus Alabama this weekend. You're not going to want to miss it. It is the game of the week in college football, but our game of the week starts 30 minutes earlier, so maybe you can catch the fourth quarter. But let's get into it. We've already looked at our 3 matchups. Now it's time to look at the storylines. And this one is more exciting than the majority of storylines that I'm going to give out this week. This could have been the selling point. I legitimately thought about making my storyline segment number 1, but then the countdown would have been all ugly. 2, 3, 1. Nah, that's not it. Maybe I did 2, 1, 3. I could have did, but like 2, 3, 1, that just would have been ugly. This is, I would say, not only is this the biggest storyline in this game, this could be arguably the biggest storyline in HBCU football this week. Prairie View A&M is playing for their lives. If Grambling defeats PV, PV can kiss their chances of a SWAC championship goodbye. They can kiss their chances of going to a SWAC championship goodbye. It's over. There's been 2 SWAC games this year. Texas Southern versus PV and Southern versus PV. And Prairie View has ended up on the losing end of both of those. Let's look at the impact of it, because now you're facing Grambling. If you lose this game, that would mean you have lost to TSU, Southern, and Grambling, all 3 SWAC West members, just like you. You've lost to 3 divisional opponents, and you can't win a head-to-head against any of them. You get into a 3-way tie with any of them, you're last, right? And this is 3 of the top 4 teams if Alcorn gets it together. You're done. Your season is over. I just don't see anybody else falling. I don't see everybody else falling so far that you're able to get a 1-game advantage on everybody that you need to. I just find it very unlikely. If they lose this game, this means everybody else would have to lose 4 games. PV has to win this. It's a must-win situation, period. There's no way around it. There's no way around this. If PV loses this game, they've lost to what so far looks like the 3 best teams in the division. Even if a war of attrition hits, how much is it going to go? Right? Like, this is just very tough. Your game or your season is on the line here. There's no SWAC championship with a loss. There's no appearance with a loss. There's no divisional championship with a loss. You already played your rival to start the season. You don't even have that to look forward to. You're just looking forward to 2025. It's done for. That's the biggest storyline to me. And it's tough because there's only been 2 conference games this year. TSU versus Southern, TSU versus PV, and Southern versus PV. PV lost both of those games. They lost both of those games. That's a tough pill to swallow. Most teams only playing their first game this week. You the only one who played 2, going on 3. You 0-3. is yeah. I'm not gonna keep going with that, but that's over. Um, the next storyline that I wanted to look at is Grambling's ability to force turnovers. If they can continue to do that, we have to have a real conversation about how opportunistic that their defense is. I think this was 2021 for TSU. I know Isaiah Hamilton was there before he went to U of H, but that year it felt like y'all can't keep getting picks. You can't keep getting interceptions. And it's not that the team was good or anything. They still weren't that good of a team. So that was, or maybe they were. Maybe that was 2022. That might have been 2022, that year that I feel like TSU was destined to go to the SWAC championship. They were going to lose to Jackson State, but I thought that they were going to make it there. And that would have been a big deal. That would have been a big deal for us. So that being said, this kind of reminds me of that, where if it keeps happening, you can't keep questioning if it's going to happen. I made what I thought was a pretty good example. I thought this was a pretty good example a couple of episodes ago. I said, look, if a team continues to give up turnovers 4 games into the season, time after time after time, if they were to get 13, is it 13? No, it was 11. That's how many. 13 is the amount of sacks that PV gave up. I thought we had the same number for a second. But if you had 11 turnovers in 2 weeks, if you never win a game without giving up a turnover through 4 games, and you had 15 turnovers going into week 5, we would say you're a turnover prone team, and we would never let you shake that the rest of the season. We would always sit there and wait, say Grambling could give one up. We have to give that same credence. We have to give that same credit towards the defense and say at any time they could force a turnover. That's who they are. I'll tell you again. If an offense, right, hear me, if an offense had 15 turnovers going into week 5, if they gave up 11 total turnovers over the course of 2 weeks, we would sit here and for the rest of the season say they could always give you one. They could go without a turnover for 3 weeks in a row. Week 4, they give it up. There goes the old Grambling. That's why with their defense, forcing 15 turnovers, forcing 11 turnovers over the last 2 weeks, we have to sit here and say at any time they could force a turnover from their 5-yard line to your 5-yard line. That's what it could be. That's what they've shown themselves to be. They have the most turnovers in the nation of any school, not just the most turnovers in the nation amongst all HBCUs of anybody. No one has done it better than Grambling. You have to give them credit. None of this, oh, it was lucky. They told me it was lucky against Texas A&M Commerce. They told me it was lucky against Jackson State. I can't keep saying it's luck, y'all. I seen them punch the ball out against JSU. I seen them get robbed of a really good one against JSU. I don't want to hear it's lucky. I don't want to hear it's lucky. These guys are practicing that. They're taking advantage of mistakes. Most turnovers come from taking advantage of mistakes. A lot of them. I'm not going to say most of them, but a lot of them come from taking advantage of mistakes. Am I supposed to fault Grambling for doing the same? I'm not. Anyway, let's push to our key to victories, because for PV, it's all about a guy that we haven't spoke about. And it's not even a guy on their team. It's Miles Crawley. If you can try to make Miles Crawley beat you, I think that's your best recipe for success. And even then, I don't know if it works. But let's look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It doesn't matter what sport that you're into, MMA, boxing, WNBA, the NBA future should be up, the NFL, college football, MLB, NHL. This is the glory days, right? These are the glory days for sports. I'm sure a tennis Grand Slam is on the way. I think the U.S. Open was not that long ago, so maybe we're bumping against the Australian. I don't know. I just watch them when they come on. I don't really keep track of when everything happens. But you're looking at all of these options. Go make some money. Go make some money. Like, go to FanDuel.com/locked on, put down a $5 bet. You get $200 back in bonus bets. So, you know, it's already a win. It's already a win just based off of that. So you go ahead and go there, put some money down on the WNBA semifinals. Put some money down on week 4. It literally starts, well, it's starting as I'm talking, but you'll have the games on Sunday. Just go ahead and go to FanDuel.com/locked on, pick your sport, and make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Our key to victory for me, for Prairie View A&M, goes through Miles Crawley. And I know this seems like a slight. Miles Crawley was selected to be the SWAC player of the year this year, you got to make him prove it. And I don't think he's proved it all year. I don't. I don't think that he's been in a position where he's needed to. Against Jackson State, I always felt like the best offense came when you were running the football. That's how I felt. I think that Miles Crowley is a solid quarterback, but he hasn't shown that he's the SWAC offensive player of the year. Make him show it this year. Make him show it this week, excuse me. Don't let Bull Hargrove do it to you. Don't let Trey Bradford do it to you. But here's the thing. It's more than just forcing him to run, right? It's more than just or stopping the run, excuse me. It's all about protecting the ball. If you don't protect the football, now Grambling's getting short fields. With the way that Grambling's doing it, Grambling will go score. They got 4 touchdowns on defense this year. Matter of fact, they may have more touchdowns on defense than they do offense. As I'm thinking about it, they may have more touchdowns on defense. No, they don't. Hargrove has 3. Or Hargrove, excuse me. I've been calling him Hargrove this whole day. Hargrove has 3. Yeah, Bradford has 2. I'm tripping. But they still have a lot of defensive touchdowns. That's the point. That's the point. It's kind of like their season in one game. And no, I don't mean that the season's on the line. We got through that in segment 2. In the sense that you really can't make mistakes. Grambling has shown the ability to take advantage of other teams' mistakes. They've done it every year, every game, excuse me, this year. They just have. This is, to me, you have to make Miles Crowley beat you by stopping the run. You have to make Miles Crowley beat you by making them drive the length of the field. No short fields, no turnovers, none of that. You can't do that. You got to make them pass the ball. You got to put them in 3rd and longs, 3rd and mediums. You got 3rd, 6 and up. 3rd and 6 and up. That's what you got to do. That's the life that you're living coming into week 5. You don't have the luxury of saying, we're gonna let Hargrove and Bradford run the ball, and now it's 3rd and 2, and you can run the ball here. You don't have the luxury of saying we're gonna throw this interception, and now you get the ball in our territory. Go ahead and do something with it. You don't have the luxury of saying that we're gonna be down 15 points in the second quarter. You don't have the luxury of that. You haven't shown you can protect. Once they get up on you, they pinning their ears back and they're rushing. You haven't shown the luxury to be able to stop people on short fields consistently. Well, nobody has that luxury, so I'm not gonna put that on you. Let's just keep it at that. That's what I think PV needs to do. And it's funny because for the other side of that, Grambling just needs to run the football, win the time of possession. You are a running football team. That's what you want to do. And that's not a slight to Miles Crowley. I know make Miles Crowley beat you for PV and run the football for Grambling sounds like a slight towards Miles Crowley, but it's not. It genuinely isn't. If you don't believe me, hey, it is what it is. But what it is, to me, is Grambling trying to get their bread and butter rolling. They have 2 really good running backs in Hargrove and Bradford. Use them. You have 2 really good guys. They love their running back duo. And I know how they talk about them, so I know that they're going to want to utilize them at all times. Then it also helps with controlling the clock. All these things are basic football. Control the clock. Like, these are basic things. Grambling should just set out to do that. Use your best aspect. Lean on your defense, run the football, play ball control, because you've shown to be able to put up points. To me, that was their best offense against Jackson State. And Jackson State has a much better run defense than PV does. Run the freaking rock. We'll be back on Monday to recap this game. I highly doubt anything is going to steal the show from this. Even a Texas Southern victory, I don't think would steal the show from this game unless TSU just absolutely demolishes Jackson State. And like I said on yesterday's episode, I don't believe that either of those teams are going to be demolished. I think it's going to be a close game, and we'll see that on Saturday. But I'll see you on Monday as we recap Saturday's action. So in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.